Typically, we think of UFC champions as the greatest fighters in the promotion, and for the most part, that has proven true. However, there are times where a fighter is truly spectacular, but for one reason or another was never able to nab themselves a title belt. That's why we're here to honor them ourselves. What do you mean it isn't as good as an actual UFC title? Of course it is. Here are the 10 greatest UFC fighters to never win a championship. Don't forget to knee that subscribe button and join the notification squad. John Fitch. Yes, he may have been more boring than watching the sun age, but John Fitch was still able to look quite impressive during his UFC run. One of the original templates for the fire blanket wrestler, John Fitch's game plan was to win at all costs. Fans may not have enjoyed this safety-first style, but it was completely effective as Fitch's UFC record was an astounding 14-3-1. Those losses to welterweight aces Demian Maia, Johnny Hendricks, and a little-known guy by the name of Georges St. Pierre. Fitch's grappling acumen, endless gas tank, and iron chin was able to take him to the very top of a welterweight division ruled by GSP. Despite his great talent, he was never able to jump the final hurdle and most likely held down by Dana White because of his no-frill style. There was also a video game rights dispute between Fitch and the UFC that resulted in Fitch being fired for less than 24 hours. But come on, would this guy hold on to a grudge? Chael Sonnen. If we were to rank this list by trash-talking ability, Chael Sonnen would be rocketed to the top. A smothering wrestler, Sonnen was a journeyman throughout most of his career until a loss to Demian Maia sparked a shift in Sonnen's game. By rattling off a series of wins, Sonnen got a date with Anderson Silva at UFC 117. Pushing Silva to the brink of defeat, Silva had to pull out a Hail Mary triangle in order to submit Sonnen in the 5th round. Sonnen would test positive for elevated testosterone levels. After pissing hot, Sonnen would never get as close to the gold as he did before, but we can't deny how much of a threat Sonnen was to Silva at the peak of his powers. He cracked Silva's impenetrable armor and made him look human, while Chris Weidman later shattered the armor to pieces. He may be fighting nonsense fights with over-the-hill veterans in Bellator nowadays, but never forget the might of the American gangster. Also, the less said about his match against John Jones, the better. Gray Maynard. Gray Maynard was so close to obtaining the UFC lightweight championship so many times in a single round, it's more akin to a tragedy than anything else. In the first round of his matchup against Frankie Edgar at UFC 125, the bully dropped Edgar twice and pounded on him like he was tenderizing a cheap steak. Maynard tried to finish his career rival, but he couldn't quite do it. By some act of God, Edgar managed to recover from Maynard's barrage. What followed was quite possibly the greatest fight in UFC history, with both fighters leaving it all in the octagon. The fight ended in a draw, prompting a rematch. Maynard knocked down Edgar again in the first round of their third fight, but it wasn't enough to defeat the iron will of the answer. With Maynard's MMA career going through a terrible time and nearing 40 years old, Maynard likely will never fight for a title again. His heavy hands and wrestling skills are enough to keep him in the minds of UFC fans forever. Joseph Benavidez. We can't read minds here, but we're absolutely certain that the UFC would have much rather had Joseph Benavidez as the face of the flyweight over Demetrius Johnson. We can kind of see why. At the point of the first matchup between Johnson and Benavidez, Benavidez was the much more popular and dynamic fighter in and out of the cage. On top of that, Benavidez lost a split decision to former bantamweight champion Dominic Cruz, so the table was set for Benavidez to take the crown. Benavidez couldn't quite do it though and lost a decision to DJ. He would rattle off 3 more wins and securing himself a rematch against his rival. Unfortunately for him, he would fall once again, this definitely by knockout in the first round. He's been undefeated since that 2013 loss, but has yet to get another chance at Johnson. A good talker, a handsome guy, a power puncher, and a great wrestler. Is there anything that Benavidez isn't? Oh right, a champion. That's why he's on this list, after all. Nate Diaz. If the expression, "I don't give a damn," was everyone personified into a person, it would be Nate Diaz. This notorious UFC fighter has been with the promotion since The Ultimate Fighter Season 5 way back in 2007. While it was his classic duo of fights with Conor McGregor that pole vaulted him into the mainstream consciousness, but to fight fanatics, Diaz was a fan favorite for years. Combining a relentless boxing attack with a super slick jiu-jitsu game for when he gets taken to the ground, Diaz has been part of several classic moments in UFC history. Who can forget Diaz choking out Kurt Pellegrino while giving him the double middle fingers? What about his infamous Stockton slap? Or how about the time he choked the swagger out of Conor McGregor? Unfortunately, for as skilled and entertaining as he is, Diaz badly lost his UFC title bout to Benson Henderson back in 2012 and never got another. Diaz seems more interested in big money fights than title reigns at this point, so it's likely Diaz will never leave this discussion. Quiz time. Some UFC fighters only make one appearance in the promotion, but are still some of the biggest names in the sport's history. Which fighter won the UFC Ultimate Japan tournament and went on to be the face of Pride FC? Wanderlei Silva. The Axe Murderer. Sorry, we just had to say that because it is an incredible name. The Axe Murderer. The Axe Murderer. Okay, I'm done, I swear. Early on in his MMA career, Wanderlei Silva had only a pair of UFC fights where he lost to legends Tito Ortiz and Vitor Belfort. Even when he came back to the UFC later, he never came close to the success he had in the prime of his career during the mid-2000s. But my oh my, what a prime that was. Making his debut for the Pride promotion in 1999, Silva found incredible success in the Japanese promotion. The looser rules allowed for Silva to exercise his full arsenal of violence, including knees, soccer kicks, and stomps from bowels of hell. His highlight reel isn't a technical masterpiece at all, but if you wanted pure, unadulterated violence from your fighters, you can do nothing wrong with Wanderlei Silva. Like we said, his UFC career isn't impressive at all, but his run atop Pride's middleweight division as their champion for nearly 6 years is incredible. And we'll get into the guy who ended his reign a little while later. Wait, before we go on to the next slide, the Axe Murderer. Alright, done. MIRKO Cro Cop. You can see it all the time at a small-time MMA show. A guy tattooed from head to toe, scowling at his opponent, trying to look tough and scary despite being a chump. Take a lesson from MIRKO Cro Cop, kids. If you want to be scary, all you have to do is head kick people into oblivion. Like some other people on the list, it seemed that Cro Cop was set up to be the next big thing in his division. A K1 heavyweight kickboxer, the former Croatian Special Forces member built his career off of a strong defensive wrestling game, combining it with head kicks never before seen in MMA. For newer fans of the sport, pull up highlights of this man and you won't be disappointed. That was until he ran into a Brazilian roadblock named Gabriel Gonzaga, who stopped all of Cro Cop's momentum from the Pride organization with a head kick from hell. Cro Cop's UFC career would never truly recover and ended his UFC career with a record of 5-6, never getting a title shot. The fact we were robbed of a Randy Couture MIRKO Cro Cop match is the biggest tragedy in all of this. Kenny Florian. Ken Flo was the sprout that kept rising from the ground. The problem was the sprout kept getting snuffed out every time it almost blossomed into a beautiful flower. Wow, I didn't think those words would come out of my mouth while talking about cage fighting. In a UFC career spanning 4 different weight classes, Florian tried his damnedest to win a UFC title any way he could. He certainly had the skills to do so with a very solid grappling game and strikes that were guaranteed to draw blood from his opponents. Because of one reason or another, though, Florian could never seal the deal. His first attempt came against Sean Shirk. Florian was simply outclassed in that match as he didn't have the experience needed to compete with the veteran. Next came his UFC 101 encounter with the legend BJ Penn. Florian was game, but Penn was in the prime of his career and choked out Florian in the 4th round. Finally came the final fight of his career where Florian drained his body down to 145 pounds to take out featherweight kingpin Jose Aldo. Once again, Florian couldn't do it when it mattered most and lost a clear decision to Aldo. Wow, we made it through this entry without making a South Park reference. We're proud of ourselves. Dan Henderson. A former training partner of UFC Hall of Famer Randy Couture, Dan Henderson must have absorbed some of Couture's DNA because somehow Henderson's career lasted until his mid-40s, and what a career it was. Coming in from the world of Olympic wrestling, Henderson competed in both the Barcelona and Atlanta Games before leaving for the wacky world of MMA. Good thing he did because he discovered that his right hand was a nuclear weapon designed to obliterate brain cells. Using his newfound power in his wrestling skills, Hendo made his way through the biggest MMA promotions and won their belts along the way. Strikeforce? Check. Pride? Double check. UFC? Not so much. In 3 UFC title fights, Henderson has lost to Anderson Silva, Quinton Rampage Jackson, and Michael Bisping. Not that he looked bad in any of these fights, though. Both the Jackson and Bisping fights were close decisions, while his fight with the Spider was impressive at a time when Silva looked untouchable. But close doesn't count for anything in sports, and the fact remains that Dan Henderson is now retired without a UFC title belt in his house. Having seen his wife, though, we won't feel too bad for Henderson. Uriah Faber. So many times. Uriah Faber has had more chances at UFC gold than most fighters have UFC fights, period. Faber holds the dubious distinction of being the only fighter that has been in 4 UFC title fights without winning a single title. This shouldn't distract us from how amazing Faber was in regular matches. So while Faber is 0-4 in title fights, Faber's UFC record is otherwise an astounding 10-2. Some fighters in his list include Brian Bowles, Eddie Wineland, and Ivan Menevar. But those victories aren't why Faber is one of the greatest fighters to never win a UFC championship. For that reason, we have to look at his WEC Bantamweight Championship reign. Before it was brought into the UFC, Faber was holding down the fort in the WEC and making people care about a tiny weight class in a second-tier promotion. He had a promotion record of 5 title defenses and was generally regarded as one of the best fighters in the world. While he was never able to parlay that into a UFC championship, the California Kid has definitely deserved his UFC Hall of Fame ring. So who was it that we were talking about in our question? Why, none other than Kazushi Sakuraba, of course. Congrats to the newly minted UFC Hall of Famer. That's it for our list. Which is your favorite fighter who never became a UFC champion? With the way interim titles are handed out nowadays in the UFC, you wonder if a lot of these guys would have wanted to compete in the current UFC. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to The Sportster for more awesome content. Thanks for watching.